Immigration to US is a journey, a challenge, and for many, a dream. From visas to policies, it shapes lives and relationships with many countries in ways big and small. Welcome to ITV Gold. I am Pia, and today we have a very special guest, Cyrus Mehta, a leading immigration attorney, thought leader, and advocate. Mr. Mehta is the founder and managing partner of Cyrus D. Mehta and Partners PLLC, a New York-based immigration law firm known for its expertise in business, employment, and family-based immigration, as well as asylum and removal defense. Mr. Mehta, welcome to ITV Gold. Let's start with the current immigration landscape. First of all, I want to know, what changes have happened or might happen to U.S. immigration and visa policies under Trump administration.
Since Trump became president on January 20th, there have been a flurry of executive orders regarding immigration. An executive order cannot really change the law. There's a statute that only Congress can enact.
Right.
But the executive order can direct government officials on how to interpret the law, and it can also change policies. Therefore, Trump has, for example, in many of his executive orders, has prefaced them by saying that there's an alien invasion and the United States is under attack from aliens. That's how he terms them. And therefore, he has to impose emergencies at the border, stop all processing of asylum applications at the border. Those who were already granted refugee visas, they could not come into the U.S.
Right.
All of a sudden, their flights were blocked. Then, just last week, the family members of people who've gotten asylum and refugee status in the U.S., they can now join their family members in the United States, even if they've been designated as refugees, which creates a very dangerous situation for family members overseas. But the key change here is in the prioritization of deportation. Under previous administrations, they recognized that they didn't have the budget to deport millions of immigrants in the U.S., so they prioritized and focused their enforcement on non-citizens who are dangerous criminals or are risk to national security or who've come in recently into the United States. Now, under the Trump executive orders, those gloves are off. Anybody is fair game for deportation. They're actually hunting down people. That was one of the main campaign pieces, which, according to Trump, got him the presidency. So he wants to fulfill that promise. He wants to show that he's actually deporting as many people as he can.
Since you were talking about deportation, let's talk about the process. How does this process work?
Generally, if you're out of status in the United States, you are vulnerable to deportation, but you can't just be kicked out.
Right.
There is due process under the Immigration Act. You have to be issued a charging document. You have to appear before an immigration judge. You have a right to defend the charges. You can even seek relief against deportation, like adjustment of status or asylum. Therefore, if one is out of status in the U.S., they can't just be expelled. They have to go through this process. And it's very important for people to know their rights.
Right.
Right? So that is in a nutshell how deportation works. But there are exceptions, and Trump is trying to go after those people who are the low-hanging fruit. People who already have outstanding deportation orders. There are many of them here. There are many in our community, too, who have outstanding deportation orders and have not left or are trying to reopen them or seek other relief. Those people are targets right now. They're going after people with outstanding deportation orders. Another low-hanging fruit are people who came to the United States within 2 years and without inspection. So people who came within 2 years, they don't need to go through this deportation proceeding. They can also be expeditiously removed from the U.S. It's very important, if you've been here for more than 2 years and out of status, to carry documentation to show that you have been here for more than 2 years. Because then you will be subject to a more elaborate deportation procedure where you will go before an immigration judge, you can defend the charges, and you can apply for relief.
So, I have read a lot in the news about ICE coming to people's homes and, a lot of stuff. So, what is the right process? What should people do in case somebody, comes at their door and knocks and says, hey, I'm ICE?
Well, first, if ICE comes to your home, you shouldn't allow them in unless they have a judicial warrant. If they only have an administrative warrant, a warrant that has just been issued by somebody in the ICE office, that cannot be enforced, so you don't need to let them into your home. If they have a judicial warrant, you have to allow them in. You need to know your rights. Regardless of whatever warrant they have, you don't need to answer their questions right away. You shouldn't be lying, but you shouldn't be answering their questions. You can remain silent. You don't need to even respond to them regarding where you're from, your citizenship, or your lack of citizenship. You can just remain silent, and you can insist that you would like to speak to a lawyer before you respond to their questions. So if ICE does knock on your door, first ask them what kind of warrant they have. If they say they have a warrant, ask them to slip it under your door.
Right.
If it's an administrative warrant, you don't need to allow them in. If it's a judicial warrant, yes, that's a different thing. But even if it's a judicial warrant, you don't need to answer their questions. You can remain silent. At the same time, don't lie.
Right. Right.
That's very important. But just remember that even if ICE tries to deport you, as I said, there is a process for most people. They have to issue a charging document known as a notice to appear, where they have to outline the charges. You have a right to contest those charges before an immigration judge. Even if you can't contest the charges successfully, you can apply for relief. So you need to basically speak to an immigration lawyer regarding how to defend yourself if you're in this situation.
Right.
But if you're caught unawares, you need to know your rights. There are lots of know your rights pamphlets, even on Google and things. You can just download them. So, for example, there is this Know Your Rights if ICE visits your home. This is something that you can download. It's a one-page document, and it's very useful to
Right.
have.
Right.
Also very important to keep proof that you've been here for more than 2 years. Because if you've been here for less than 2 years, as I said, and you were not inspected in the United States, you could be summarily removed from the U.S. without any process.
So has the government lifted the restrictions on immigration arrests, whether it's schools, whether it's churches, whether it's hospitals, or not yet?
Yes, there is an ICE executive order that has removed these restrictions. The previous ICE policy was not to go to sensitive places like
Right.
hospitals, schools, places of worship. That's now been reversed.
Okay.
So ICE can actually target you wherever you are. And even if you're in a school, I'm hoping that if you're a kid, a minor, they should not. But let's say you're a teenager, you're 18, 19, 20, they could target you in school too,
Right.
especially if you have an outstanding deportation order. And as I said, if you don't have that, then there is a process, and the process takes time.
Right.
You just can't be kicked out of the country as soon as they pick you up. If they arrest you, you can even ask for bond.
But have they kept any kind sort of legal protection in for immigrants, especially in these areas, or no?
Unfortunately not. I don't think you can rely on ICE to tell you what your rights are. You have to know your rights, and you have to insist that you want to speak to a lawyer, and you should be very circumspect and not volunteer information. Now, of course, if you have a green card and you're here lawfully, you can tell them that.
Okay. Okay.
If you're here as a non-immigrant on an H-1 visa, you can tell them that. But let's say you have some problem with your status. You've your recent H-1B extension got denied, and you're now filing an appeal or a motion to reopen, you may be out of status. So then you want to tell them that you need to speak to a lawyer and then have that lawyer contact the ICE official.
All right. So, everybody has been talking about this birthright
Oh, yes.
citizenship, which is the hottest topic right now. So, I just want to understand, what is the concept behind this birthright citizenship?
So the wonderful thing about America is that under the 14th Amendment of the U.S. Constitution, any child born in the U.S. automatically becomes a U.S. citizen,
Right.
unless they're a child of a diplomat who was subject to immunities and privilege, because diplomats sometimes are immune from prosecution in the United States.
Right.
So that small group of children born in the U.S. are not U.S. citizens. They can still be green card holders.
Right.
They can still assert that they're permanent residents. There's another group of people which you may not find now, but if you were born to enemy, somebody in a hostile army that has occupied the United States, then too you won't be considered a citizen. But other than those two exceptions, any child born in the U.S., regardless of the parent's status, is a U.S. citizen. They may be here unlawfully. They may be here applying for asylum. They may be here on H-1B visas. They may be green card holders or on their way to citizenship. Their children are citizens. And that's the beauty of America.
Right.
No matter where your parents are from, what their status was, all children here start equally. And what Trump is trying to do is to change that interpretation
Right.
regarding, because the 14th Amendment says that one who's subject to the jurisdiction thereof. The only two groups that are not subject to the jurisdiction, as I told you, are those who are diplomats and those who are part of a hostile army that has occupied a part of the United States. Everyone else is subject to the jurisdiction. What Trump is trying to say is that if you're here unlawfully, you're not subject to the jurisdiction. That doesn't seem to make sense. It's not constitutional, because even if you're here unlawfully, you're still subject to prosecution. You're still amenable to the laws of the United States. If you're buying a house in the United States, you have to abide by whatever rules and things,
Right.
You are subject to the same, laws involving contracts, regarding regulations, regarding driver's licenses. So you're subject to the jurisdiction thereof. And so your child should be entitled to U.S. citizenship. That's a bedrock constitutional principle, but Trump is trying to change that. He issued an executive order that would have actually taken effect today, but fortunately, there are at least 4 courts, if I can recall, that have now blocked it. So the
Okay.
courts are doing their job. The lower courts, 4 judges, federal judges, have held that this executive order is unconstitutional. But this executive order actually goes even beyond parents are here unlawfully. What it says is that if the parent is here on a temporary visa, but even here legally, their children will not be subject to birthright citizenship. So you can well imagine how this would impact Indians if this executive order took effect. It would impact people here on H-1B visas, people here on tourist visas, people here on student visas. People here on H-1B visas are here for 10 years or more because of the green card backlogs.
Right.
It takes a hell of a long time for one who's been approved for a green card to actually get their green card because of the per country limitations. And India is subject to these terrible backlogs in the employment-based categories.
Right.
And they have to wait not just years, but decades. There are some studies saying that they may have to wait their entire lifetime. They won't get their green card. It's really unfair to deprive the child of such a non-immigrant from getting birthright citizenship.
So you're talking about backlogs.
Yes.
So is there a solution for those backlogs? Does a solution exist?
So that's a good question, but that goes beyond Trump. That's in the law itself. The last time the Immigration Act, the legal immigration system under the Immigration Act was amended was in 1990. It needs an update. We're now in 2025. Congress has not increased the legal immigrant visas in the employment-based or in the family-based categories.
Right.
So Congress can do that. In the meanwhile, there are ways to kind of, try to move the visa numbers so more people can apply for adjustment of status. So when the visa bulletin, the filing dates in the visa bulletin moves forward, people can apply for adjustment of status and they can get work authorization. But other than that, Congress has to amend the Immigration Act and infuse more immigrant visas in the system, which it has not done. And that's because there's a logjam.
Right.
Congress, right now the focus is on the border, on undocumented immigration. I don't like to use the word illegal because Trump has now brought back illegal alien, but I still want to respect people and use the word undocumented immigrant.
Right, right. So tell me, like, what's next, like, after Trump's executive order, like, attempt to end a birthright citizenship?
Well, I think it has to go up. Right now the courts have blocked it. So fortunately, it has not taken effect. It was supposed to take effect today, but it has not taken effect. Trump has already appealed one of the blocks, so it's gone into the Court of Appeals. So we're going to see appeals in the federal courts, and ultimately the Supreme Court may take it up. It doesn't need to take it up. Let's say if all the Court of Appeals have affirmed the lower judges, the Supreme Court can just say that we're not going to take it up.
So,
But let's say some courts have gone the other way, then the Supreme Court has to take it up to resolve the conflict. Supreme Court might take it up and then rule. I would still be surprised if the Supreme Court agreed with Trump. There might be two judges who might go with Trump, but even though the conservatives are in the majority in the Supreme Court, it would surprise me. But, again, under Trump, one can be surprised all the time.
right, right.
And not in a pleasant way.
So tell me, like, since you do this day in and day out, what are the biggest challenges in U.S., like immigration law is kind of, facing today?
Right now, we don't have a rational immigration system that provides pathways for people to regularize their status. Employers who sponsor skilled workers, especially if they're born in India,
Right.
have to wait for decades. They have to remain on an H-1B visa for years on end.
Right.
So this is one of the challenges. And this has nothing to do with Trump, but Trump can exploit this and use the flaws in the existing architecture of the legal immigration system to create more trouble, to impose more roadblocks. So people are applying for H-1B renewals, which they may have to do for most of their lives. I hope not. But we don't want an administration to say, oh, now gotcha, we're going to now issue a request for evidence.
Right.
Even though you have a routine renewal application, in the last Trump administration, they issued a lot of requests for evidence
Okay.
of H-1Bs who were just applying for routine extensions, who were just trying to comply with the law, remain here legally, and work here legally, and pay their taxes like they're supposed to.
So, but do you think like Congress will be in favor of like doing anything about this H-1B, program, especially for the skilled workers?
The problem is that when Congress tries to do something, the H-1B also is very limited. So there are only 65,000 plus another 20,000, 85,000. There are many Indian students who come every year. They graduate, they may get jobs when they're on practical training. They can't, if they have to go through a lottery process. So obviously we need more H-1B visa numbers and we need more green card numbers. I don't believe when some people say that we have to restrict the H-1B visa program. Both are important.
Right.
We need to have more H-1B visa holders and we need to have more immigrant visas so people can get green cards easily as they're supposed to. Right now, none of this is happening in our system. We need Congress to reform this. Whether Congress will reform it is a big question because their focus is now on the border, on illegal immigration, and even when they need to pass meaningful reform in the Senate, you need to get 60 votes. You need a supermajority.
So tell me, like, how might this, like, MAGA groups, their demands impact the H-1B programs?
I think the MAGA groups we saw, in December, the MAGA groups generally are opposed to H-1Bs. You have two factions. You had Musk that was kind of in favor of H-1Bs, although he's not in favor of many other immigrants and wrongly cast them as illegal immigrants and illegal aliens. But he was at least in favor of the H-1B because he employs people on H-1B visas. And I think Trump went along with him, but a lot of the MAGA groups are opposed to all kinds of immigrants, legal or undocumented. The MAGA philosophy is against immigration, and I'm sorry to say that, but if you don't happen to be of the same white color, you may be, you're not seen, you're seen as the other. And we saw that with H-1Bs in December. There was this big debate within MAGA. And right now, at least Trump went along with Musk. And he said he liked the H-1B program, although he wrongly characterized it. He said he's used it, but he's actually used it on his golf course and in his estate. But this was for the H-2B, the lower skilled workers. He's not used the H-1B program. But anyway, he's come out in favor of the H-1B. So right now, if Congress were to reform the H-1B, I still think that they could do a lot of mischief.
Right.
But at this point of time, if there is some reform to our legal immigration system, it is much needed. We need an update. We need more visas. We need more pathways for people to come here legally. Because if you create more pathways for people to come here legally, then you won't have illegal immigration. It's as simple as that. The reason why we have illegal immigration is because we don't have these pathways. And then we penalize people who fall out of status with the 3-year and 10-year bars.
Right.
Or even with the permanent bars. So we really need an update to our system. We need to have a system that will allow more people to apply for waivers. And if you have a rational system, then it's easier to get your ICE agents to enforce around the borders of that rational system. Right now we have an immigration system that is broken and it's being exploited by Trump because it's an imperfect system. It's not like people want to enjoy being here illegally. All people who want to see me want to become legal, but they can't because there may be no pathway to become legal. So the majority of people remain in this twilight zone or remain here illegally. Because if they want to become legal, they have to leave the United States and do consular processing, and then they can't come back for 10 years unless they get a waiver. Very difficult to get those waivers. So that's the problem. We have a very defective, broken immigration system that nobody wants to fix. And then you have the people who want to enforce around it, who are trying to enforce around a very problematic, defective immigration system that causes a lot of suffering.
Right. So, let's even talk about the students, especially the international students. So what's, going on with that and, their visas, F1s, if they want to, go from that visa to an H-1B or green card? How does that work?
Well, so again, students here can come in on F1 visas. Once they have to stay out of trouble, they should remain in status. And once they graduate, they can apply for practical training. If they've graduated with a STEM degree, then they can get a total of 3 years of practical training. If they have an employer in those years while they're in practical training, that employer can then sponsor them on an H1 visa. There's a lottery, for the H1. So
Right.
students sometimes remain in F1 status on the practical training, and some students don't get it. And then, unfortunately, they would have to leave. But so that's how students come here, and if they get a job and get on an H1, then they should ensure that their employer sponsors them for a green card.
Right.
And even the green card can take decades. At least they can remain in an H-1B status and remain here lawfully. So, but the thing is that this is not Trump's issue. This is the problem in the immigration law. But of course, because Trump is so enforcement-minded, students, for the slightest reason, so if a student gets picked up for driving while intoxicated, even if the charges get dismissed, there's a good chance that the visa in your passport will get revoked. So you have to then deal with it when you travel abroad and when you want to apply for renewal. You can remain here. Students who are, involved in these protests, Gaza protests, Trump has come down heavily. There's an executive order now saying that they could enforce the immigration laws against students who protested. Of course, they have to still be subject to the deportation provisions of the law. But let's say if you protested and you're suspected of committing some unlawful act or supporting terrorism or a terrorist organization. And by the way, today, the terrorist organizations expanded. The gangs in Central America, they've now become terrorist organizations. Doesn't apply to Indians. But let's say if you're an Indian and you were helped by one of these cartels that has now been designated as a terrorist organization, you now might be accused of providing material support to terrorism and may not even get a visa. So, so with students, you're in a non-immigrant status. It's not a stable status. And you're allowed to protest. You're allowed to exercise your First Amendment rights. But if you're doing that, do that in a lawful way. Because if you do get arrested, and even if your charges get dropped, the consul may know about it and they may revoke your visa.
So let's talk about the family-based immigration, and of course humanitarian issues. So what is the biggest challenge families are facing in reuniting, under U.S. immigration law?
So again, in the family immigration categories, there are backlogs. Right now, if you are a citizen and you want to sponsor an adult son or daughter born in India, it will take almost a decade. If you're a spouse of a green card holder, a minor child of a green card holder, it could take up to 4 or 5 years. There are backlogs even in the family categories. If you're a sibling of a U.S. citizen, it would take 18 to 20 years.
Wow.
So now, but of course, if you are an immediate relative of a citizen, so if you're a spouse or parent or minor child, then if you're in the United States, you can get your green card, you can adjust status. And that's how it's linked to the birthright citizenship issue. So what Trump is trying to do, if you're a child of an H-1B and let's say your citizenship is not recognized, you're not recognized as a citizen, then even when you turn 21, and let's say your parents are in the green card queue,
Right.
now the 21-year-old child cannot sponsor the H-1B parent. So we've had a lot of successful cases where parents have waited. Their children are now 21. They are sponsoring their parents. But if the children going forward are not recognized by the State Department as citizens, or not recognized with respect to their ability to sponsor a parent under the Immigration Act, it basically impacts Indians who are in the employment-based category too.
So tell me, is there anything like legal protection which exists for undocumented immigrants who have lived in U.S. for number of years, lot of years?
If you're an undocumented immigrant who's lived here for many years, and if you're put into deportation proceedings, you could apply for a relief known as cancellation or removal if you have qualifying relatives and you can show extremely unusual and exceptional hardship. So let's say your children were born in the U.S.
Right.
and you can show this very extreme form of hardship. Very difficult to meet that standard because it's extremely unusual and exceptional hardship, very high standard. It's not extreme hardship, but it's more than extreme hardship. Some judges interpret this very restrictively. Your child has to be really sick, will not be able to survive if they move with the parent to the home country. But other judges may view it more broadly, but you still have to, the standard is very high. And you can then apply for this relief known as cancellation of removal if you've been here for 10 years. You have a good moral character, so you don't have any major criminal convictions. And you can then show extremely unusual and exceptional hardship to U.S. citizen children, or to a spouse, or to a parent. So that is one relief people can get if they're placed in deportation. There are other reliefs also. If you can also, if you're married to a U.S. citizen, and let's say you were inspected in the U.S. and you're out of status, you can adjust your status in the U.S.
Okay.
And you can use that as a defense against deportation. If your child has now turned 21, you can show you were inspected into the U.S. You can also then apply for adjustment of status through your child who's now 21. A lot of people may not be able to establish that they were inspected if they crossed the border without inspection. Most Indians were inspected, but there are lots of Indians that we know that came across the Canadian and the Mexican border without inspection. So those people would not be eligible to apply for adjustment of status, even if they have a child who's 21, or they're married to a U.S. citizen, or their spouse has now naturalized. They may not. But then there are ways, again, it goes beyond the scope of this interview, but it may be possible under very, very limited circumstances to show that, okay, if I go abroad, even if I get a 10-year bar, I can apply for a waiver by showing extreme hardship to either a parent or a spouse. And then I can go abroad, get my visa from abroad, and then come back.
Okay.
But
So-
it's a long, drawn process. But that's why, there are options even for undocumented people, but they're difficult, and people should obviously not get, fooled by unauthorized practitioners. They shouldn't be taken for a ride. They should go to qualified lawyers who know immigration law. It's very important to go to somebody who's a lawyer and a subject matter expert on immigration law because it's very complex.
So let's talk about, asylum and border policies. Like, how are asylum cases being handled at the U.S.-Mexico border, or even you were talking about Canada,
So right now, under the Trump policy, if you come in from the southern border, you can't apply for asylum because they've characterized this as a national emergency. There's an alien invasion, whatever that means, and so asylum applicants cannot be processed at the southern border. And most Indians come in from Mexico. They've come in through some other, they came in through the Darien Gap or whatever, and they can't apply for asylum. Um, so, um, so that's the current policy. But if you're in the United States and you want to apply for asylum, you can apply for asylum.
But how does this like humanitarian like parole programs, how do
Yeah,
they
so the
work?
humanitarian parole doesn't apply to India, but it applies to, for example, Nicaragua. It also applies to Afghanistan, Cuba, Haiti. So those people were paroled into the United States, and it was a great invention, because administratively Biden allowed for the parole of people from these troubled spots, including Afghanistan, which is close to India, and the Ukraine too. Now all these categorical parole programs have been blocked. They've been rescinded by Trump. So if you've come in on parole, you won't be able to extend your parole anymore.
Okay.
Just this morning, there was a new executive order saying that if you are from some of these countries where you receive parole, and if you file an application now for an independent immigration benefit, such as adjustment of status, they're not going to process that application. I believe you can still file the application. They hopefully can't deport you. You can apply for asylum or adjustment of status, but they won't process it if you're from these countries that have received specific or categorical parole.
So in the end, I basically want to ask you, like, what is at risk and what might change? You may want to summarize the whole thing.
Right now, I think the risk is there. If you're out of status, you want to make sure that you know what your rights are. You want to make sure you know all your options, what you're going to do in the worst case scenario. If you have an outstanding deportation order, there may still be ways to reopen that. You want to know everything. You want to exercise all your options. If you have children who are U.S. citizens and you have an outstanding deportation order, you want to make provisions. You want to have a power of attorney. You want to give somebody else an authority to handle their financial situation, their bank accounts, their schooling.
Right.
Especially when you're that low-hanging fruit, you've got that outstanding deportation order. If you don't have an outstanding deportation order, there'll be time before they actually deport you because they have to go through a process. But you still need to know your rights. You still want to know what you can do, whether it's now or in the future. And people should definitely be aware of that. If you're legally here, you want to stay here legal. If you're on a non-immigrant status, you want to ensure that you're doing everything correctly. Because right now, you don't want to take any chances. Everybody's vulnerable if you're not a U.S. citizen. Even if you're a U.S. citizen, a naturalized citizen, even that category of people may be vulnerable because they could try to, rescind your naturalization on the grounds that you were not truthful in your citizenship application. You may have not stated everything truthfully. There are material misrepresentations in that application. And they have indicated, Stephen Miller, who is the architect of Trump's immigration policies, has said that they will now go on steroids, they'll even go after naturalized citizens. So nobody's immune, because if they go after one group, it'll creep, it will expand. In fact, there's this policy about, even if you're a U.S. citizen convicted of a crime, there's this talk about having some arrangement with El Salvador. And so, in effect, you could be exiled to the prison complex in El Salvador under a deal with the United States. And if you've committed crimes or you've been convicted of crimes, you may be sent to Guantanamo, where you don't have the same, legal protections. And Guantanamo detention was designed for 9/11 terrorists. Now they're applying to immigrants. So yeah, I think it's just going to get worse. It's broadening, and they planned everything. They have it all in their manifesto, and they're slowly unveiling it. So right now, nobody's immune. Everybody could be a target. On the other hand, you want to make sure that if everything is in order and you're here lawfully, hopefully you should not have much to worry about. But they could still like issue a ban against the country, like they did in the last administration. You never know which country could be up for a country ban. And then if you're outside the country and you're not a US citizen or green card holder, you're on an H1 or you're a student, then you won't be allowed to come back. So they would impose it against, the countries that they know that they don't like, But initially there was talk about broadening it to other countries. And it need not be countries that just, have, terrorism or encourage terrorism. It could also be countries that hurt US workers.
Right.
So if, I'm just saying hypothetically, it could be applied to India also. Because if they feel that there are too many people on H-1Bs and too many green cards that are impacting or hurting American workers, then they could put a pause. And if there's a recession, let's say with the tariffs and things go south with the economy, then yeah, immigrants are already the scapegoats. There'll be more reason to scapegoat them further.
Right.
When there is an economic recession. And Trump will have no compunctions in again blaming immigrants for all the ills.
And you know what? It's very vast subject and very interesting, but thank you so much and wishing you all the best. Thank you.
Thank you. So, from as a lawyer, our role right now is to just help our clients. We need to, we need to legally, apply whatever strategies in the defense of our clients. And we're going to just do that. And if necessary, we will go into federal court to block deportation orders and the like. We've already started doing that. And every lawyer should be doing that for their clients. So however disheartening it might be, at least I feel somewhat satisfied that I'm able to help people who are feeling vulnerable, who are frightened, and hopefully give them some comfort.
Thank you so much.